Hey guys, how's it going? Board now back with you on this very special video, and this is a biggie. I've obviously been doing my end of year lists. We're now into 2020, so a good time to look back on the decade just gone, I think, and I'm going to be doing this for both TV and for film. But first of all, gonna start with television. So on this video, I will be running down my top 20 television shows of the last 10 years, of the decade of the 2010s, as I believe they called it. And what a fantastic decade for TV it has been. I think it's been the decade where TV has confirmed its dominance, or confirmed that it is now very much the equal of film, and that it's not going to quiet down anytime soon. And so that has been confirmed. It's been a fantastic decade for TV. It's without question, we now live in the golden age of TV, and it doesn't show any signs of stopping soon, because when you look ahead to some of the TV shows that are going to come out this year, I know in The Guardian at the weekend there was, like, in the guide there was a rundown of forthcoming shows for 2020, and so many of them caught my eye. They looked like really promising shows, at least shows I would want to give a try. Some of them I'll probably review on this channel, and they were just new shows, never mind some of the already fantastic shows that are coming back for new seasons, like Killing Eve, for example. At some point we'll surely get the fourth season of Stranger Things this year as well. So when you consider many great shows already that are, into their run and going to have new seasons, but then think about, wow, look at all these other new shows that are coming up, which, even if only half of them are, hits and are good, that's still a pretty good percentage. So yeah, it shows no sign of slowing down, and it's been a wonderful decade for TV, and the way things have changed once again, the way Netflix have really changed the game, and the streaming services, they've sort of broken that monopoly really that film had, or then kind of traditional cable channels had. It's now much more accessible and much more cheaper in many cases to view these great high standard shows on streaming platforms, or to, maybe catch up with older shows. So I think competition always tends to be a positive when you look at these things, and it's never really good for one or two companies just to have a monopoly. And again, the standard has been growing, and TV has become more multi-layered. The storytelling, it's become much more cinematic, where to the point where a lot of TV shows nowadays look more cinematic than many films. So and the A-list cast, the high standard casting that you sort of associate more with films in the past, has now been happening across the board on TV. So exciting times indeed, and who knows, maybe cinema, it'll finally give them the kick up the backside that they really need to shake things up. So before I start on this list, I'll say this is my own personal list. Now, there's so much nowadays with TV, and there's so much which I need to catch up on, which I haven't, caught yet. So obviously those shows couldn't have gone on the list. Something like The Expanse, I've never seen an episode of that, so that's definitely on my list to catch up with. I haven't seen any of Mindhunter yet. I know that's a show which gets a lot of praise as well. So there's many things I've either only seen a little bit of, or I've not seen all of it, or I've not seen at all, I should say. So those shows obviously I can't count. I mean, something like Mr. Robot, which gets a lot of critical acclaim, obviously a very interesting experimental show. I've seen the first two seasons. The first season I really liked. I wasn't so keen on the second season. I thought it felt sort of felt a bit flat in the second season. It felt like the storytelling got a bit lazy. But I would obviously watch it again, and I will do a rewatch of that, and obviously catch up on the other 2 seasons, 4 seasons overall. So obviously I couldn't really include Mr. Robot based on what I've seen of it, just the first 2 seasons. I think what's worth saying about a show like that is the fans who really loved it, who loved it, I should say, really loved it. There's really a passionate, hardcore fan base for that show. Again, it's a niche thing, it's a minority thing, but the people who love it really, really love it, and that's something to be said about that, and that's partly the appeal of what we live in right now, this golden age of TV, because you are getting more diversity in the types of shows you're seeing. You are getting more niche based shows which now have an audience where they can sort of be successful in their own way, their own little niche sort of thing, rather than just struggling for, if you like, cinema screens, the way film has sort of gone with outside of the mainstream very little getting a look in. So that's all positive. But Mr. Robot, I will give that a watch. I'll give it a fair chance. And as I said, I liked the first season. I wasn't so keen on the second. So maybe over time I'll see it as this great sort of masterpiece of TV that I know some of us see it as. But we'll see. I'll come back to that another day. So this is my own personal list of 20. And before I start, I'll actually do a few honourable mentions. One of those is The Good Place, the I think it's CBS sitcom, the very surreal type sitcom with Christian Bale, Kirsten Bale, and obviously the legend that is Ted Danson, and a really fine ensemble cast as well. Obviously, this really quirky sort of surreal type idea of this woman who kills herself at the start, or is killed at the start of the show, and she's a really cynical sort of person, and she ends up in this place which she thinks is the good place, is like this version of heaven, and Ted Danson, his character, is kind of like the kind of host of that universe. And then it's slowly revealed that because of the way she lived her life, she essentially is in the bad place, and they're just fooling her. And you get the whole host of characters. You get all these different rules. You get the sort of quirky, like sort of, I don't know what you call it, but the voice piece and the sort of computer system in Janet, a brilliant character. So that's a really, really different show, and that's a good example of how sitcoms, I hesitate to even call it a sitcom, but how comedy series have really changed and become this really ambitious sort of thing, where The Good Place is a good example of that, where it tries all these different like wacky ideas. It's very character driven, but it's almost sort of non-linear. They do play with structure. It's a very, very bizarre but very charming and playful little show with good characters, basically, and it's a lot of fun. Really, really smart humour. It's very niche, the humour. It's not going to be for everyone, but I think that's just a good example of how far sitcoms, comedy television has come, how different it is. Now, I'm in the middle of season 2. I was hoping to see more so that maybe it could have made the list, but because there's 4 seasons, the 4th one is just, coming to the end now. And I'm in the middle of season 2, which I'm absolutely loving. But if I'd seen a bit more, maybe it could have snuck on the list. But it's definitely a strong honourable mention. It's got even better in season 2. And I just love Christian Bale, who, of course, so great in Veronica Mars, which returned this past year as well. I've seen the 3 original seasons of Veronica Mars, but not the new one, so I couldn't possibly include that here. Speaking of that, that's another thing I'll do actually, is I will do other decades on these lists. So I will go back and do in reverse order, because obviously I'm starting with the decade we've just had here. So I will go back and do the other decades top whatever 20 lists from those. We'll see, and I'll do the same with film. We'll see how it goes anyway, but I can certainly do a good few decades once in a while. So The Good Place was a nearie. As I said, if I'd seen a bit more, I might have put it on. Another one, which is more of a guilty pleasure, but a show which I think works much better than maybe you would expect it to, is Bates Motel, which I think is a very enjoyable, sort of lighter watch. It has some gothic moments in it. It does have a few moments that kind of make you jump out of your seat. But just a really smartly paced, character-driven little drama, which does something a little bit different with the Norman Bates story and the whole backstory, obviously, as you know, as a prequel to Psycho. And I think Vera Farmiga as Norma is just one of the best characters of recent TV. I think she just nails that part so well. She's just so icy and really awkward, has that presence, but at the same time she brings a lot of humanity to the part as well, and it's a good example of a melodrama kind of done really well. It's got decent style and it is very character driven. I think the characters, for the most part, I don't like all the characters, but I do. There's enough that I enjoy. I mean, I think Olivia Cooke, who of course is a British actress, you would have seen in quite a few films. I think she's absolutely delightful in her role in it. So they do some interesting things. It's a fun little show. So Bates Motel, again, a very personal choice, but an honourable mention. Didn't quite make. I still need to see the final season, actually. There was 5 seasons in all, but I enjoy the 4 seasons anyway than I've seen. Another one, this time a much more serious choice. And again, this is part of the whole Netflix sort of revolution, if you like. It is really serious, sort of gripping, like documentary series. And this is one that stood out. It came out a couple of years ago. It's called The Keepers from 2017, as I said, a couple of years ago. And it really hits home a very important modern sort of theme, really. So it's about like this group of like ex-nuns in Boston, and they're investigating the mysterious disappearance of one of their sisters many years ago, many decades ago, and there was this suspicion and the church had something to do it. And along the series it uncovers all these horrific sort of instances of abuse from the church. Really the sort of theme that has popped up this decade as some really shocking stories coming out of the Catholic Church. And I think it's an 8-part series from what I can remember, but it really goes in depth. It's an inspirational story just because of the spirit of the women involved, the way they never give up, they continue to campaign, you know, that they get this like just this resistance from the church and this very negative attitude, a lot thrown in their face, but yet they want justice, they want to know the truth, so they keep plugging away. It's really inspirational. They're really remarkable characters, people, very interesting for the subject, really opens it up, really makes you root and care and interested in the subject. There's a lot of depth. The documentary explores things from many different angles, and it's such a contemporary subject. explored very, very well. It's a really powerful documentary series, and that's on Netflix. So I highly recommend The Keepers from 2017. That's an honourable mention. It was close to making the list. I think that's mostly it. Spiral, this French drama, this French like procedural, which recently had its 7th season, which probably looks like the last season. They seem to tie things up pretty well overall, but it's this very sort of gritty, stylish French crime drama. Really good pacing. You get some really interesting characters. I think there's definitely some light touches as well to make it a bit more sort of palatable, but yeah, it's one of those because obviously that's been a big thing the last decade, sort of like Scandi noir and these different foreign crime shows, and some of them are more my bag than others. I remember this one called Black Lake, which was a supernatural drama series, which that it was either Sweden or Denmark, one of the two that came out. I think it was Denmark, I could be wrong. But that was a good example. I enjoyed that one. But they are a bit hit and miss. A lot of them don't really grab me. But Spiral's very good. As I said, very stylish. I think it does have that lightness of touch. Good characters, some good reveals. The only reason it doesn't make the list, because I think it is a very good show, is I've not seen all of it. It's sort of been a bit on and off. I know my mum's a big viewer of it, and I think she's seen all 7 seasons or series. I've seen, I think, 1 or 2 of the early ones, and then I watched the last one with her, which was really good. But yeah, out of 7, I've not really seen enough to really put it on this list. If I'd seen all 7, there's a chance it would have gone on the list somewhere. So that's Spiral, which is one that's really worth checking out. Another one sort of more on the fringes, more sort of art house, is Top of the Lake from Jane Campion, who of course this big sort of award-winning director in films, you know, films like The Piano, films like Holy Smoke, yeah, In the Cut, many different films. So yeah, this was her with Elizabeth Moss in this one as well, and Nicole Kidman in the second series. But this really dark and gothic, really bizarre sort of take on the procedural, really did it in a very different way, very, very grueling. Really had its own sort of style. Again, it really showed, you know, this auteur director coming over to a different medium and really shaking things up. The first season I love. I've not really seen the second season, so that's why it's not going to make my 20. But based on the first season, a really, really great show. So there you have it. That's worth a mention. Top of the Lake, which came out of Australia. There's just some that I need to see more of. How I Met Your Mother, for example. That's obviously a sitcom. That's one I've been enjoying, but I've been watching on and off a bit, so I need to see more of that. But out of recent sitcoms, I think that's a good one. So I'll now get into my top 20. This is my top 20 shows of the last 10 years. Here we go. Number 20, I was speaking of sitcoms a moment ago, and I've gone for one here, and it's The Community, of course, Dan Harmon's show, which is like a film nerd's wet dream, really, with all the references, with the style, with how it does these high concept episodes, which of course are film themed and really break open the conventions of film, play with them and have a lot of fun. Of course, one of the lead characters, Abed, is just this full-on movie and TV nerd. That's kind of his universe. He sort of lives everyday life like it is a movie, much to the annoyance of his friends around him. it was one of these which really brought Alison Brie to a wider audience. Of course, she's had success now in Glow. She's been in various things. She was also in Mad Men, various things. But she's an absolutely delightful character, and you just fall in love with Annie. She's very sort of perky and upbeat, but in a likeable way. And yeah, Alison Brie is just so charming. It's hard not to like her in anything. And you got this great ensemble cast. It was this great comeback for Chevy Chase, really. He'd been not really seen in anything for years, and he comes back in this, and he's just brilliant. The casting of him and the way they send him up is just so perfect. But it's a very basic idea, and I think it's the way they run with that and then play with it which really makes it fun. So you got these group of misfits who are all very different in this study group. And they're at different stages of their lives, you know, there's different reasons for them to be there. And they just form this study group, and you get various stories from there. Obviously, you've got Jeff Winger as the sort of suave ladies' man who's this sort of ex-lawyer, and there's a lot of sort of deadpan fun at him, a lot of fun at his expense, but a nice little sort of love triangle going on with his character and Britta and Annie. And I mean, the thing to say about it is the first 3 seasons I think are brilliant. I think those 3 seasons you'll see some of the best comedy you'll ever see, really, just really inventive stuff. They really go for it. The cast have really good chemistry, and I think it is the high concept episodes like the video game episode in season 3 where they're just in a video game for most of it. Or, I mean, one of the most charming episodes of TV you'll maybe ever see is the Christmas episode in season 2, where it's done like an animation and it's like Abed's whole thing. But it's absolutely beautiful. It's done with such heart and care. And it's a charming little episode. And you've got obviously things like the paintball episode in the first season, which, like, again, deconstructs the whole style of those macho-like action movies. Just has a lot of fun. Obviously, after season 3, the show had a ropey-like production history. You had issues behind the scenes. Dan Harmon left for a season, and 4 is seen as this really sort of bad season. I've still not seen it, I have to be honest. I'll catch up with it one day so that I can sort of tick it off. And then there was cast changes. Harmon came back and the quality did improve, although maybe not as good as it was in its prime. But yeah, there were cast changes as well, so I think it was a bit rocky the last sort of few years, 3 or 2. But it's a very original sitcom, very well cast. Just did something really different and just speaks to me personally as a bit of a nerd. But I absolutely love the Community, some of the best comedy of recent years, and especially the first 3 seasons I highly recommend. So my number 20 is Community. My number 19 is a show that gets really mixed reviews. People seem very hit and miss on it. It is a Marvel show. It's one I'm sort of currently doing on the channel. It is Jessica Jones. So this had 3 seasons. The 3rd season aired and finished last year. And Jessica Jones is a funny one because as someone I've talked to online sort of says, it is one of those frustrating shows where there's just something in it which drags it down, or where there is a flaw somewhere. And that's true. If you watch all 3 seasons, even the first season, which seemed to be like universally sort of loved, there are people who are quite critical of that season. I mean, I think there's one particular character and one particular storyline which doesn't sit quite right with me, and I'll say it's the cop and the drug sort of drug addiction. That doesn't quite work for me, and that did drag things down. But it is true. I mean, season 2 is seen as the worst one, and I wouldn't disagree with that. It takes a little too long to get going. Once it does, I think it kind of turns the corner, but certainly that first half of the season is a tough watch, and it's a little bit too soapy. Season 3, I thought, brought it back around, and I think one of the things to say about TV and the progression of characters and stories over the course of multiple seasons is that if the writing is doing its job, I actually think the later season or the last season kind of should be the best, because I think it's like building to this end point, and the characters naturally should have changed and progressed by the third season. So that's why I would argue just Jessica Jones season 3, which is a very enjoyable season anyway, with another good villain, a real sort of cerebral villain. But because of what it does with the main characters, people like Trish, for example, her sort of changes, and even Jessica's changes, the way she's like reevaluating her role in the world and her role as like this private eye. I think because of all that stuff, it probably is the best season actually overall. I just really enjoyed seeing these characters in this very different place. And obviously, in case you don't know, she's a private eye in New York. As I said, it's Christian Ritter, who's this very deadpan sort of performance, very kind of cynical. It's very black. It plays on the tropes of noir, which I like. I really love that sort of like look at big city life and this very downbeat sort of sarcastic sort of character. It's a really good performance from Ritter. I think it's the sort of role she was maybe born to play. It's odd because when you see her in other things, and I've seen her pop up here and there, she always seems to be the more upbeat, the more like perky kind of, go get them sort of character. And yeah, she's never been better than in Jessica Jones. I think you've got really great supporting roles and parts. I think obviously Carrie-Anne Moss is really great as Hogarth, this really interesting lawyer, she's very hard to like. She's a good villain, but there are moments where she does like teeter on both sides, where she definitely works along with Jessica and definitely does things that are, more positive, more working for the good cause. You've got some great villains. Obviously, David Tennant in the first season set a new sort of standard. So it's an odd show. I mean, I think every season does have moments where it dips certain storylines or characters. So I think season 3, it reaches this great point around about the halfway point where you're really getting into it. I was really excited, and then I think maybe for a couple of episodes it takes a little dip, but it's not a massive one. And then I think it's always important to stick the landing, and the third season really sticks the landing. I think the finale is brilliant, and I think they had an advantage because they knew ahead of time then the show was going to be cancelled after the third season. So in the past, I mean, there's certain shows where you've got this example. They didn't know then the finale was going to happen when they went into a season. So you get these weird sort of moments where you don't get it sort of wrapped up satisfyingly enough, or not at all in some cases. I mean, that might be just another issue with the old network sort of way of doing things, because in past you've got like sort of tensions between the network and with the guy or woman running the show, and I think sometimes they go into a season hoping they'll get renewed, but then it doesn't work out, so they have to kind of try and manufacture a way to round these things up. So Jessica Jones, I think the third season benefited from knowing this was going to be the last season. And I think they did a really good job of it. So I think because it landed on such a good note, it ended on such a good note. I think that really lifts it in my eyes. Because if you end on a bad note, no matter how good what has come before is, then I think that does, it leaves it on a bit of a downer. So I really like season 3, and it's my number 19, Jessica Jones, on Netflix now. So for my number 18, I've gone for more. Well, it's a BBC show. Again, it's the procedural. I'm not massive on procedurals, but this show did stand out partly because of its lead character, and that is Luther, the BBC crime show with Idris Elba. And he previously had got, some attention for his role in The Wire, got some buzz around that, but I think it's Luther that really took him to the next level as far as people recognising him, his presence and charisma. I mean, he has great charisma, he has great presence, he does a really good commanding performance in the Luther role. It's kind of a progressive type of show just because he is obviously, a black sort of urban character. I think he has this kind of, he has a very kind of, I don't know, I think he is a well-read character as well. He does have this background where he is very intelligent. He maybe does have higher educations, but there's no doubt that he is very connectable in the series. He really comes across as this very true to life, everyday sort of guy, but also this complex character. And I think you just enjoy it. I mean, it's this sort of heightened sort of psychodrama in a way, with a good sort of style, a bit like maybe Jessica Jones does for New York, is a bit what Luther does for London, maybe even more so, where you do see the murkier side of London. It's not just this picture book way of looking at the city. As I said, Elba's a great character, or Luther is. Elba's a great presence in the show. And we've got to talk about Ruth Wilson, because she made her name in this show as Alice, this great anti-hero, and TV and film is just riddled with great anti-heroes, and I think she's one of the best of recent times. She's absolutely fantastic. Ruth Wilson plays these sorts of characters so well, where she's just full of presence. She's so icy, so manipulative. She's just very convincing, and evil, but in a very subtle way. She doesn't lay it on really thickly. And at the same time, she does bring a humanity to it as well. Shades of light and dark, which I think all the best villains have. All the best characters have it, full stop. But the relationship with Luther and the way it sort of pulls his character further to the dark side is just fascinating stuff to see. I mean, some people argue that the later seasons aren't as good. We recently had the 5th season, which was the start of last year, actually. And that could be the last season. Again, the way that ended seemed to maybe suggest it might be finishing, but who knows? We'll have to wait and see. Yeah, I don't necessarily agree it got weaker. I think it was pretty consistent throughout. You can always argue this season was better than that one. I just enjoyed it a lot. It was a very pulpy, enjoyable type show, good characters, and I think it was dark when it needed to be, and I think they got some great supporting, cameo type parts. And I think the cases, because of course it is a procedural, the cases are very convincing, really took them into some interesting areas. So I like Luther a lot. It's very enjoyable. It's obviously a shorter series, being a BBC drama. You get 6 in a season, apart from season 4 where they I think because of availability of the actors, that they only did like a one-off two-parter for that. So that's a much shorter season. But 6 episodes each time. It's 6 or 8, I can't remember now, but it's one of those BBC-style shows, and it's a standout from the decade, in my opinion. That is Luther, which is 18. Number 17, back to Netflix, a show I've talked about a lot already. It was one of my favourite shows of last year, and one of the most surprising. That is Unbelievable, this mini-series to come out of Netflix, which 3 really well cast leads. You've got Caitlin Danver, who's a real rising star, was also in Booksmart last year. And she plays a rape victim who at the start of the series is sort of pressured into sorry about that. At the start of the series, she is pressured into kind of going back on her original statement. So because it's a bit more simplistic, and I think it's down to like the detectives at the time misreading her, her natural sort of nerves in the interview process, and obviously so it becomes this sort of like ironic sort of cruel irony where it becomes easier for a victim like that to actually retract her statement. And I mean, those scenes with Danver, that they're just so painful, just so awkward to watch, but they feel so naturalistic. I think this is a real star on the rise. She was great in Booksmart as well. She's just natural, and she's such a good physical performer. The way she just makes herself shrink into the role, the way she gets across just how that character wants to disappear and escape from the world around her. And I mean, what the story then does is it follows her after that experience. It follows her day-to-day life, and just how she views the world and how she views men, how difficult it is to interact with, any sort of male after that experience. It's beautifully poignant, and I think realistic and relatable in that way for anyone who's been through that. But then of course we get the other side of the story where you have the Mariette Reaver character, who I've never seen in anything, but she's brilliant as well, and she investigates this rape case which has a similarity to Marie's. And then in another state you have the Grace character played by Toni Collette, who she has a similar case, which again has a similar sort of pattern to what happened there. So they contact each other, these 2 police officers, 2 detectives, and they start working together because of the similarities. And then you get this really slow burn, fascinating look at this case, and just all the little details which really make the drama engrossing. There's nothing boring about it at all. Every little detail is dramatic and works. And slowly the 2 halves of the story come together. So as I said, we follow Marie and then the other side, and they slowly come together in a really satisfying way. I've obviously reviewed the whole thing on this channel, and I think the final episode they really couldn't have handled any better. I think they did it just about right. They just gave us the right amount of sort of closure and what was a more positive sort of ending. It's a show or a series which no doubt puts you through the ringer throughout, understandably such a tough, complex subject. The 3 performances are amazing, 3 of the best performances of last year. And also I just loved like the camaraderie between the Grace and Karen characters. They have this really great chemistry, and a fascinating relationship because they start off on the wrong foot. They're very different people, but they come to accept each other's differences, and they really gel and really make a good sort of team. And that's the other thing. I think, again, it does have that lightness of touch that you need in these sorts of dramas, you know, because they are very heavy going, and it does have those lighter moments, which they feel realistic. They don't feel jarring. They don't take you out of the drama. I think because they're character driven, and it's just that lightness of touch which makes the drama a bit less of an ordeal, if you like. But it's a truly impressive drama. I think pretty much perfection. And apparently there have been suggestions of maybe doing a kind of a follow-up series. Now it's sort of loosely based on truth, so it's a case of how you would do that. You would have to do another story. Now, where I stand on it is I think I would be alright with it as long as it was a new case, because they obviously closed off this case. They could maybe do a time jump thing, but certainly I'm up for more Karen and Grace. If they did another story with those characters, that would be fantastic. I just love those two and the performances. But unbelievable, the title says it all. It is fantastic. So that's my number 17. My number 16, this time going for something a bit lighter. And this is going to be Glow, the Netflix production of Glow, which of course is this sort of, I guess it's a dramedy. It sort of fits into that sort of category, but it's based on the 1980s women's wrestling promotion of the same name, which has this reputation of being this really sort of cheesy, kind of goofy women's wrestling. I mean, it's back in the days when women's wrestling wasn't taken that seriously, and they're just known for their outrageous sort of characters and gimmicks, and just being really, really silly, and just one of those things that maybe wrestling fans, hardcore wrestling fans, would look at in embarrassment sort of thing. But it was very much of its time. I think if you watched an episode now on YouTube or what have you, which I haven't, by the way, but if you did, you would probably, you know, have a little bit of a chuckle and say, okay, that was entertaining, and it's a slice of what it was like back then anyway. So sometimes you get more out of these things rewatching it. But you sort of think when you go into this, and Addison Brie again is involved, is one of the leads. But going into this, you wonder, well, is this going to be that interesting? What can they really do with this story of this women's wrestling promotion? And it's brilliant. It's this light sort of watch. You get really sharp sort of moments of like satire and humour. The performances really gel nicely together. You get some really like good sort of in jokes, and it's one of those where whether you're a wrestling fan or not, you can really enjoy it. You know, if you are, you'll get a lot of the references, and you'll see how realistic it is, how it really gets into the creative side of wrestling. But also poking holes at some of the cheesy side as well. But it really, the details are very good, the way they get into the whole, you know, the way wrestlers try different things, the way a lot of wrestlers and their identities are sort of tailored on like movies and stuff. So all that stuff is very sort of realistic and catered to wrestling fans. But on the other hand, I think you get a lot out of it if you're not a wrestling fan, because the stories and the characters are just so engaging. And it has just the right level of humanity. It does shift every now and again into something a bit more darker or something a bit more moving and together. I mean, this is a family of wrestlers. You really get that sense. You've got Mark. I forget his last name. Is it Macaron? But anyway, as Sam, the sort of promoter. He's or like the producer, and he's absolutely fantastic. He's such a good character. Some of the great entertaining deadpan moments come through him, but he has a real sort of character arc, as do many of the characters like Sheila, and you see the progression over 3 seasons. And I think it's one of those, a bit like Stranger Things. I think it benefits from working as its own thing, but also progressing things and looking at like the politics of the era. So I mean, the 3rd season, which came out last year, all the stuff in Vegas and looking at them exploring touring for the first time rather than just doing a weekly TV show, is really fascinating stuff. It really opens up fresh possibilities. Some delightful characters, some really funny moments, some good drama as well. It's a very solid show, very consistent throughout. And I think arguably it's just got better as it's gone along. So that's Glow, which has one more season, the 4th season. I think you can expect sometime in 2020, but not quite sure when. But Glow is my number 16. I enjoy it a lot. So my number 14, I just need to... Okay, yeah, because I've sort of switched around positions a little. My number 14 is actually a HBO show, and that is Big Little Lies, which had its 2nd series last year. Not sure if it's the last or not, but this is a great example. You've got this high class, Hollywood style cast. In the 1st season, you had Nicole Kidman, you had Laura Dern, you had Reese Witherspoon, Zoe Kravitz, who might not be so well known, but has popped up in a few things. Shailene Woodley, who people would know. And then you introduced Meryl Streep in the 2nd series, which proved a great bit of casting, but a very different way to do a sort of a murder mystery, where you kind of hear about this murder at the start of the show, but then what the 1st series did, I mean, murder isn't the right word when you find out what happened, but you kind of assume it's a murder until you get to the point where they show you. So someone's been killed and there's an investigation, but what the show does then is it follows the characters and their lives until you get up to the reveal of what actually happened. And that's what the 1st season is about. So you get these different characters in this suburban sort of area and all their sort of little dramas. Obviously, the one that's really gripping and really grabs you is the Nicole Kidman with her husband who abuses her. And that's a really disturbing relationship to watch, but really, really well done, really gripping, and things really come to a head. The 1st season is just so well written and paced, and you've got these kind of really stylish sort of dream sequences or memory sequences where it really captures the state of mind of the characters. You've got a mystique to it, and you've got a real edge to it. Top class performances. I mean, Reese Witherspoon, actually, she has a very interesting character because she becomes more likable or more relatable over the course of the show. The casting throughout is very good. I mean, Meryl Streep does stand out in season 2. There was a worry actually that her character, because of her connection to the Skarsgård character, might tip the scales, and it might try and make her sympathetic or his character more, and it doesn't at all. It handles that all very well. Season 2 isn't as good. Now, but it's still good. I still liked it a lot. I think one positive of season 2 is we've got more of Regatta, the Laura Dern character, who's an absolute delight. She has some great lines. I love the relationship with her and Gordon. It's maybe a more funny season in some ways, season 2, which is no bad thing. And I think Regatta is just one of the great like bitches on TV on recent. She's absolutely brilliant, and I've loved her for years. So great character, great casting, and it could be the end because they did tie things up quite nicely. Originally, it was only going to be one season because it's based from a novel, and it was presented as a mini series. So they did a second one because it was successful, and maybe to round things up a bit more. They obviously felt there was more story to tell. But I feel this could be a good place to leave it now. Maybe leave it as 2 very, very good seasons. The second one not as good, but still high standard, I thought, personally. So that's Big Little Lies, my number 15. Again, I'm getting confused because I switched the order a bit. So my number 14, may be a little surprised to see it this high, but it is Person of Interest. This really inventive sort of twist on the procedural, kind of a sci-fi series as well. So it's produced by Bad Robot, which is, of course, the production company of one J.J. Ambrose. And it's this really fresh take on, as I said, the procedural and policing and on crime dramas. So what you get is this character played by Michael Emerson, who was in Lost, one of Ambrose's previous shows. And he plays this sort of really nerdy tech guy who's basically really, really rich, and he puts that money into creating this creation, which is the machine. And what that is it's this thing which can detect like people in danger or people about to commit crimes. So almost like a sort of a person of interest style case, a case which has been sort of disregarded by the authorities. But what he does as a way to kind of to protect people and not invade too much on people's privacy, you get this thing called the machine, which he, as I said, is his invention, which only gives him the basic number of the people. And then he has to try and work out from there who the person is and whether they're in danger or whether they are the potential threat. And so that's kind of the setup of the show, and he sees this as a force for good. And he enlists the help of Jim Caviezel's character, who's this ex-Marine soldier, and they sort of work together on the cases week from week. So it obviously involves the Caviezel character going undercover a lot, and the Michael Emerson character comes up with a lot of because he has this great technical sort of tools, he'll use a lot of them to help Caviezel and come up with identities or just get him into places he might not be able to get elsewhere. And it's one of those where the first couple of seasons, I think it does start off as a more conventional procedural, and it does feel quite televisional. There's not that much unique to the way it looks and what have you. And I think obviously depending on how good a case is, that depends on how much you're going to enjoy the episode. So the first 2 seasons I think are a bit more hit and miss. They're good seasons, I enjoy watching them, but they're not quite hitting the top gear than the show would. But what happens is over time you do get longer running storylines, you do get more growth to the characters. You get this character of Carter, policewoman who has some connection or some like communication with the two guys, and unbeknownst to her superiors, she works with them off and on because they help her solve cases, and she slowly gets drawn more in, and you get more information on, or she starts finding out about the dodgy practices of the police and their department, and it goes into police corruption. And the whole police corruption storyline, which really hits into high gear in the first season, is when the show really comes alight. Sort of like the final half of season 3 is some of the best television I've seen in recent years. It's absolutely gripping, it's compelling, really, really exciting, really nail biting. I mean, on one level, it's a very pulpy, entertaining type action show, which does get ridiculous at times. But hey, I do enjoy the ridiculous. You get what I'm saying. But there's a lot of fun action set pieces. There's a lot of goofy comedy moments, which I enjoy. But over time, the characters build and build, and you get some really great characters. You know, you've got Fosco, who's another police officer who helps them. He's this really kind of charming, you know, comedy, shrubby type character, but also you can see he's a good cop, and he's a good guy as well. He's very down to earth. And then, of course, you have to talk about Root, played by the fantastic Amy Acker, who, of course, was on Angel as Fred, and such a good character, so underrated Acker is as an actress. And I was talking about anti-heroes earlier, she becomes this really great anti-hero who's introduced at the end of season, I want to say season 1, I might be getting no, I'm pretty sure it's season 1. She's like involved in one of the cases at the end of season 1, and at the time they obviously don't know who she is, and it turns out she's someone who's essentially playing them. She's sort of coerced them into a compromising situation, and then she's revealed as this computer hacker Root, and she gets her own music, which I love, and Amy Acker just lets rip. She's absolutely fantastic. She's got such presence. She's so sinister. She's very, very playful, and she has great character arc over the season, so you get more and more into her. And again, a very murky character, a very, you know, in between the lines sort of character, where you get some really fascinating dialogue, some really fascinating situations, a really complex character, a really entertaining and infuriating sort of character. It's a great performance by Amy Acker, and I just love her relationship with Shaw, the Sarah Sherry character. I've probably said her name wrong, but she's another character who gets brought onto the team, I think around about season 3. But once you get into the more long-running plots, the more arc plot, and the way they connect certain... So sometimes you'll have a case episode where it just feels like the one-off case, which most of the episodes are, but then a lot of times they'll connect like that case to the bigger plot, and there'll be a reveal. And you get this whole thing with gangs in New York, like you've got the Alliance character and his gang. You've got this really fascinating subgroup called Vigilance. And you get flashes back and forth, and it plays with structure. Again, like there's this episode in season 4 where it just plays with like multiple personality or multiple possibilities. So it basically replays the same scene over again, but things change just a little bit, you know. So depending on one decision, one sort of movement, it can change fate, it can change destiny. So again, you get high concept sort of episodes like that. Now the finale of Person of Interest, the fifth season, wasn't as good. I think seasons 3 and 4 are the high watermark, and the show is worth watching just for those. Yeah, the fifth season didn't quite stick the landing. It was still enjoyable, but it's one of those odd ones where actually the episode that comes before the finale is actually, it feels like more the finale. And the final episode, the actual finale, feels a bit like treading water a little bit. But it's a very enjoyable, consistent show with lots of good ideas, lots of good like character beats. So it's it puts an original spin on sort of an old idea, and you do really engage in the characters over time. You probably need to give it a bit of time. But a very enjoyable show, and one which I rewatch a lot, has some fascinating ideas. So that is Person of Interest, which is my number 14. Yeah, I've gone for it. 2019, 18, 17, 16, 15. Yeah, my number 14, Person of Interest. I'm just double check. So my number 13, and it's back to HBO, and this is David Simon, and it is The Deuce. So this started a few years ago. The third and final season is airing now. It's of course the look at the porn industry starting in the 1970s. Each season tends to move on about 5 years. And it's looking at these group of characters and how porn really took off, and like the sort of growth of things like VHSs and these little sort of places around in New York, which gave more opportunities, but also how porn became mainstream and how that changed things. You've got a really strong ensemble cast, people like Maggie Gyllenhaal, who really gets to flex her muscles. It's a really meaty role for her. She plays this really complex character who's ultimately very ambitious, very forward thinking in terms of the way females should be represented out of, she's an ambitious female director herself. So there's this real tension between her and this producer she works in, as in she wants to raise the standard and wants to make better quality of film. So it really depicts like the sexism of such things, but it really looks in depth at the porn industry and how things change, and this sense of a family, and some of it is good, some is less good. We get the involvement of the mob. You've of course got James Franco playing, identical twins, a real dual role, and he's very, very impressive. You get some interesting storylines with both characters there, and it's just really, really high class TV, really high class production values. You've got a fantastic soundtrack, just some brilliant direction and storytelling. It's really gripping. It has the ability to really put you on edge, really flip the switch at certain times. Certain scenes may start quite light-hearted, but it sort of draws you in, and then it sort of shocks you. It pulls a turn where things go a little bit darker. Really great characters and acting. It's a fantastic period piece, which, as I said, I think it benefits from moving 5 years each time. I think the second season only really got better after the first season. Pardon. I think it just makes you think a lot by using these different periods in times and these different it also shows you the side of the police force and how they're involved and how murky certain police officers are in all this. But it sort of presents these complex positions where sometimes you have to get your hands dirty, even if you're on the right side and morally you are against these things. You sort of have to get your hands dirty as a compromise to try and slowly get change. But yeah, it really covers things in a lot of depth. It's an impressive production. one of the most consistent dramas of recent years. The Deuce is absolutely fantastic. I'm early into season 3. I've only watched the first episode, but I thought it was a really strong first episode. It's not going to be for everyone, but I think it's some fantastic drama. So that's The Deuce, my number 13. My number 12 is Fargo, and this was a bit of a gamble because, of course, it's from the film Fargo, the Coen brothers film, one of their most beloved. But they are, of course, producers on the show. And I think the first season was kind of this sort of almost pastiche to the film, where it's very similar to the film. And I mean, it got mixed reviews because of that, where maybe you felt the Martin Freeman character was doing a bit of an impression of the Philip H. Macy character in the film. But I thought it got a good balance. I thought it really got the sort of black humour and the tone of the film overall. I think you had good characters, good storytelling. It really shook things up. It's a really sort of playful, surreal type show. You've got quality casting throughout. And I think with that first season, there was a lot of good tense sort of moments, a lot of playful moments. And then I think season 2 just took it to a whole new level. You got this story of gangs like in the Midwest. They introduced the sci-fi element because that was topical at the time, you know, people starting to talk about UFOs. And who knew then they would go to the level where they actually brought in a UFO at one point. They just dipped it into the plot just for a scene, and it's just mind-blowing. That moment is one of the standout moments on TV over the years because it was set up before they're talking about it, but they actually had the balls to put a UFO into this sort of very realistic sort of drama, and you think, whoa. But it's just brilliant the way the characters react to it, and just as a moment to go, oh my god, that was insane. It's just, and again, really great casting in that series. People like Ted Danson, you've got Kirsten Dunst, you've got a lot. You've got Ron Swanson himself. You've got I'm forgetting the actor's name now. Someone will have to tell me, but he's just brilliant. You think, yeah, that makes sense. That's him. That's Ron Swanson. But it's a really visually stunning season. It's really broad and sweeping and very dramatic. Again, it's got this quirky, offbeat sensibility. It's really done a good tribute to the film itself. It's sort of complemented the film, but it's added its own ideas. I think season 2 is the standout season. Now, I know a lot of people were a bit down on season 3, and I think maybe it's the weaker of the 3. I think the finale wasn't so great just because it did this thing at the end where it left it on this cliffhanger and left it open. And without giving away a twist, I'd just say then I don't think they handled that. It was kind of too much of a cop-out the way they left it. It's almost like they thought, oh, this will be really clever. We'll really, we'll just leave them hanging. And it felt like it was a bit too clever by half, if you like. So the ending of season 3, it felt flat. There's also another thing that happens in that finale which didn't leave me satisfied. I thought it was a bit, well, what's the point in that really? Overall, I think season 3 is still a good series. I think Ewan McGregor's very good in, again, playing twins, a bit like I said with Franco. He's great, actually, in those roles. And you've got Mary Elizabeth Winstead, who I think is a really good actress. You've got a great villain as well. But, yeah, maybe not as good. So it's going to be interesting now because season 4 is coming this year, 2020, so the 4th season. It's been a couple of years away, so It'll be interesting to see what they do, but I think the standard of Fargo has been very good. And I think it's made for some really unique cult viewing. And personally, I don't see why fans of the film wouldn't like the series. So that's Fargo, my number 12, the fourth season on the way. Number 11, again something a little bit different, I've gone for The Good Wife. So this is this CBS show, and you won't see many of those pop up on my list, but it really became this sort of example of prestige sort of TV. I mean, it's kind of glossy, it does have a light sort of feel to it, but also there is a lot of meat on the bones, a lot of sort of sharp observations, a lot of really clever sort of cultural moments, or a lot of satirical moments, a lot of... It's very sharp the way it grabs headlines and puts them into the show. So a real twist on this kind of series where you get the lead character at the start of the show has just recently been divorced. She's got 2 kids. She was originally a lawyer and she stepped away from being a lawyer. And then you get a whole scandal with her husband, played by Chris North, who's like a politician. And the scandal is that he has an affair with the hooker. And there's this whole thing where he is, incarcerated sort of thing. So it's all about the public perception and what damage that does on the wife. And the title is sort of very ironic because it's like saying... women, she's expected to be the good wife sort of thing. She's expected to be this rock, this support for the husband. So the title is on purpose being this sort of sneer, this sort of ironic sort of comment on the sort of sexist sort of culture. And from that point, what the series does is really progressive, because then we see the Julia Menago's character go back into law. Even though she's a single mother and she's got to support her children, she then goes back to law, to being a lawyer. She goes to this firm, which one of the guys she went to college with, an ex-boyfriend, he's kind of like the partner. So he gets her in the door, he vouches for her, and she becomes a lawyer there and works her way up the ranks. And you get various characters around the firm. You get like this sort of like undercover type character, who's really, really an interesting character. She's one of the stands out, but who kind of gets information to help them with the case. But it's more than just the standard kind of glossy, like courtroom type drama, because really it's the side stuff, it's the stuff going on with the characters, it's the investigations and the cases which really make it more fascinating, make it sharp. As I said, they really do move with the times, they really grab headlines out of the news where they're fresh and put them into the show. There's an example where during the phone hacking scandal they used that and put it in a storyline, and that's, at the time, that's a really hot topic. So it's really well done. The characters are nicely developed. It's one of those shows, it did go on maybe a bit too long. You've got 7 seasons. They're long seasons. I think the later seasons weren't as good, although there's still high points. I mean, I remember watching season 6 and just thinking, this is fantastic. This is some of the best writing of the show. And I mean, in the later season, I think it's in season 6 actually, you get this really shocking reveal. You get this real gut punch moment that you don't actually see coming at all, and that really changes the game. And I think it's one of those shows where it is a bit soapy, it is a bit glossy, and it sort of plays up to that, and there's nothing wrong with that. But it's an entertaining watch, it's very sharply written, some fine characters, the courtroom scenes are well done, but as I said, it's the stuff out of that and outside of that, and it's the meat of the case which really makes it. So a really high class drama with with some great writing and direction and acting. So I enjoy it a lot. The Good Wife, there you have it. That's my number 11. I had to think from. And of course, there is a spin off with the Diane character, The Good Fight, but I've only seen a little bit of that. But The Good Wife just misses out on the top 10. So here we go, the top 10. My number 10 is Killing Eve. Another show I've talked a lot about, but I think Sandra Oh, Jodie Comer, this really stylish, sort of dark look at the spy sort of drama. You get this fascinating relationship between the hero, or the detective, and the spy. Jodie Comer's performances is just amazing. It's just so like multitasking, multi-layered. She plays all these different characters, assumes their personalities with ease. She's playful, she's funny, she's sexy, she's intelligent, she's vulnerable at certain times. I think we saw that more in the second season. But her and Sandra Oh, who I've liked for a long time, they have lightning chemistry. They really bounce off each other really nicely. You've got great music, you've got great drama, some tense scenes when you need it. But it's one of those, it really subverts your expectations. It does very different things than you would expect a spy drama to do. Now, if you don't like if you like traditional spy dramas, if that's your thing more and you don't like this more playful, subversive type thing, this probably won't do it for you. But if you're not so into spy dramas, I think this is almost like the antidote for that. It's almost like the alternative spy drama you'll probably love. Again, lots of style, some great music, some shocking moments throughout. They managed to keep it fresh in season 2. It's actually a clever idea to change the showrunner for each season. So season 3, which is coming soon, is going to have another showrunner, except this time it's another female, so that's kept it going because it is a feminist show. It's a feminist sort of twist on the spy genre. So to have a female each time, it makes sense. But the fact it is a different showrunner each time actually, freshens it up. And I think because Phoebe Waller-Bridge is a producer on each series, so it's still her vision. It's just a different showrunner, and it's already been commissioned for season 4, so we have quite a bit more Killing Eve to come. And I think it's one of the hottest shows of the decade. It's one that's just captured the imagination so well, and has had award success, and I think it deserves it. So Killing Eve is my number 10. And whenever season 3 comes, you can expect reviews of that on the channel. My number 9, speaking of making an impact, speaking of doing something very different with a standard genre, this is the procedural again. It is Line of Duty, the cop show that explores police corruption and follows a team, a specialist team in the police department who specialise in exploring these cases of police corruption and hello? Okay. Okay. Okay, no problem. Okay. I'll see you soon. Bye. 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 Sorry about that. So yeah, this group of police officers who specialise in these cases, and they go through it detail by detail, and I think that's how it changed the way a procedural is done, because it is so much about the interview scenes. It's so much about how those scenes are written, how they're built up, the details. So it's another one like The Good Wife, where the level of research is just staggering, and they kind of balance this get this balance between realistic cases and things that do go on, but just putting it into this like compelling sort of drama. And so the interview scenes really do make the meat of the show, where it'll lead you along one way and then suddenly it'll switch things out from under you and you'll get these neat little twists put in. Also, it's not a standard procedural because you get long running arcs. And what season 5 did really well, although it's probably the weakest season, what it did well is it connects the whole show essentially. So you do get characters and stories that are carried over season upon season. You get this big mystery about this character called H, who is meant to be the top guy in terms of this corrupt group of cops. He's like the ringleader. And H is mentioned very early on, and then finally in season 5 they come back to it and it sort of gets revealed. There is going to be a season 6, but you've got excellent casting, you've got excellent storytelling, the pacing is really deliberate and spot on. But the twists and turns are really well handled. It's very engrossing, very gripping throughout. Sort of very likeable, funny little characters as well. It does have the lighter moments which you sort of need, but really exciting scenes. It's very fresh. Again, it's doing something different, a bit different with that genre. And it's another show which just caught the imagination over the last 10 years, and it does stand out. And I think the first 4 seasons are just high class. The 5th season maybe not so, but it was still a good watch once I got into it. But I'm always excited for more Line of Duty. It's a really fascinating show. So Line of Duty is my number 9. My number 8, back to Netflix, back to a mini-series, although this has now spiraled into an anthology, and that is The Haunting of Hill House, which came out a couple of years ago. So you've got Mike Flanagan as like the main showrunner. He of course is known for the horror genre, did films like Hush, he did Doctor Sleep recently, he did Gerard's Game. Really accomplished sort of horror director, so he took on this story which had previously been a popular movie, I think in the 50s or 60s, from a novel as well, and turned it into this 10-part sort of one-off drama, but just switched the perspective a bit, where you had the sort of story of these siblings, these 4 or 5 siblings, who back in the past they lived in the mansion, the house of the title, and their mother was left behind. Something happened to her. There's a mystery there. The father went away, took the children away from the house. They never found out the truth about what happened to the mother. And then you get flashes back and forth. Sort of each episode sort of takes a different perspective from the different children. They're now adults. They're sort of separated from the father because of what happened in the past. And it was actually absolutely thrilling. A great watch. As a horror show, the horror moments are very nicely judged. It's truly scary. Some good sort of visual moments. It knows how to get under the skin, but the characters are very, very well written, very well cast, some great performances. And it tells a really compelling, fascinating story. It deals with some really tough, awkward subjects like addiction. And I think each character has their own unique sort of perspective and personality. I mean, the character of Theo, I think, is my favourite. She's just absolutely brilliant. This really fascinating character. And again, crucially, the human drama works, but so does the horror moments. I know I've heard some people say they're not so keen on the final part. The final part, it became a bit over the top, hysterical, a bit too much with the CGI, but no, I disagree. I didn't feel like that. I thought it stuck the landing very, very well and was one of the best shows of 2018. And that is saying something because there was a lot of good shows out there. But very, very impressive. I think by doing it in parts but making it one complete story in a series, so not it obviously makes sense, and it really stands out, and I think it's become one of the sort of kind of flag wavers for bringing back, great horror TV. So very, very impressive, and they're sort of turning it into an anthology now, as I said. So later this year on Netflix again, you're gonna get a new horror haunted house type story from Flanagan, and that's going to be a version of The Turn of the Screw, which of course was originally a film, The Innocents, in the 60s, another review I did on this channel. So I can't wait. I really like Flanagan. I know he has his critics, but I like him a lot. Haunting of Hill House was great, great television, and I'm looking forward to seeing what he does with The Turn of the Screw. So there you have it. That will come later in the year on Netflix. But Haunting of Hill House, my number 8. My number 7, going back to something a bit lighter, we have Parks and Recreation. One of the great comedy series, not only of the last decade, but ever, in my opinion. Admittedly, it has a slow start. I think you've got the showrunner Michael Scarn. When you see that first series, you think this just feels a bit too much like The Office. To the point where the Leslie Knope character, played by Amy Poehler, feels like a male version of Michael Scott. So that is a problem. You have to get through the first season. It's not particularly great. I mean, it's not terrible. I don't hate it as much as some people. But the characters just aren't as likeable. They're just not as relatable. It's season 2 where it really hits its stride, where they decide, we're not The Office. We're going to do something a little different from that. It's almost like I sort of think of it as like the comedy version of The West Wing, where these are characters in government that you are meant to root for, characters you can believe for, who you believe are on their side, and they have a lot of fun with that, a lot of playful humour, some fantastic dialogue, just some great pairings. I think the casting all the way down is just really, really good. But like the character of Tom, this sort of slick, sort of queasy sort of guy, this kind of weasel at the start, who they just make more endearing, more likeable. Andy, played by Chris Pratt, a pre-fame Chris Pratt, is just like this lovable sort of doofus. I love the relationship with April. I mean, the fact that they get together in season 2 and they're together at the end is really impressive. You don't see that very often on TV, whether it be in a drama or in a sitcom. But it's such a likeable show. It's one of the most consistent comedies ever. You get really great character growth over the seasons. The end of season 3 with the whole festival storyline is really, really touching. One of the great ends to a season. And then season 4, it gets even better with the whole political campaign and the stuff that leads from that. You have this ambition of the Leslie Knope character from the start to go into politics and to really make a change. And sort of, her heroes are people like Hillary Clinton and Michelle Obama, and she's really inspired by those characters. So it's really a good female progressive character, and the relationship with Anne, I think, is one of the best friendships on TV. It maybe dips again a little bit in the last couple of seasons, but overall it's one of the most consistent comedies you'll ever see. So that is Parks and Recreation. I absolutely love it. So that's number 7. And my number 6, it's another mini-series. And again, 2018, Sharp Objects with Amy Adams, one of the best actresses of her generation. and she's just incredible in this role, in this series, this 8-part series. So she plays a journalist who is kind of persuaded to go back to her hometown, and there's this case of a child that's gone missing, these murders, and she shows up and she's got all this history. She has to stay with her mum, who's played in terrifying form by Patricia Clarkson, another fantastic actress, and she's got all these old skeletons. She has to detail this really murky history, and at the same time she's in a very complex and fragile state emotionally. She has a history of self-harming, which the Sharp Objects title comes from, and she tries to reconnect with her younger sister, who she doesn't know very well. She hasn't really spent that much time with her growing up. And that's a fascinating side to the drama, but it's another one of these really eye-catching cinematic shows. The use of location, the shooting is just really beautifully visually, really great use of sound. Psychologically, it's very, very powerful and intense. It's a really sophisticated and gripping drama. I mean, Amy Adams is given full reign. She's on top form in this. You get subtle twists and turns that are very well handled throughout. It's one of the most uncomfortable TV shows I've probably ever seen, but it's beautifully handled. It's sort of beautiful, like metaphors and visual moments, and it feels so psychological, so distinct and ambiguous. I think how ambiguous moments are is what really makes it. The fact then for a long time you're not sure if, because it's from the one character's perspective, so it's played in this ambiguous sense where you're not sure if the character, her worldview is just her worldview, if it's legit, or if she's like imagining these things. So that is very fascinating. You get a lot of interesting themes to do with feminism and representation and small town culture and kind of the media and how things are spent, but also how tough it is coming back to your hometown after all these years away, how things have changed, and the fact she didn't have the most positive of upbringing. The season, the end, the final episode is fantastic. The twist in the tale, it comes from a novel, of course, which I've read, I think, from the Gillian Flynn, the author of Gone Girl, who was heavily involved in the show. So she actually wrote, I think, 2 or 3 of the episodes. But Sharp Objects, one of the standouts of recent years. It doesn't get much better than Sharp Objects. So that's my number 6, and you should track it down. Only, as I said, 8 episodes, and that's it. My number 5, so into the top 5, it's The Handmaid's Tale, and you talk about this dystopian science fiction, really futuristic sort of ambitious show, which of course based on a novel, the Margaret Atwood novel from the 1980s. And it's this series which just captured the imagination. The first season, of course, hit on Hulu, and it dropped not too long after Trump was he got elected, of course, and that gave the whole commentary on female and the femininity and the state, and this very dark masculinity and the restriction on female and sexuality. It just gave it this whole another level of meaning. Sometimes timing is everything, but the fact is the first season did live up to that. It's a brilliant directed season. Elizabeth Moss's performance is note perfect. She never really puts a foot wrong. It's such a complex, tricky character to play. You've got fantastic performances around her, engaging, interesting characters, but it's such a dark, such a challenging show, but in the most brilliant of way. You get really interesting use of music. It's a really meaty show, really powerful, and that first season just couldn't have gone any better. I think it's pretty much perfect. That's the first season of The Handmaid's Tale, and it's gone on since then to further explore the universe. Obviously, they've started looking at the resistance and the kind of backlash against the regime, so that's been a very interesting development. Season 3 was a bit more middling, a bit more up and down in quality. It wasn't the high standard of the first two seasons, and I think I might have said this on this channel before, but you do wonder if maybe the June character, the Moss character, has peaked, if maybe they need to write her out now and maybe go on to different areas. There is, of course, going to be a season 4, and it'll be interesting to see what they do with it. But I think just because of the cultural impact and the high standard when it's at its best, and the first two seasons are very, very good. I think it was that there were little things in season 2 where it was a bit in the danger of just going through the motions and just kind of becoming this torture porn style series, but it did stay on the right side of that, and it has progressed. But maybe season 3 it did dip a bit and wasn't the same sort of standard. So we'll see what happens in the future. But it's certainly one which has been undeniable this decade. It's made such an impact, and the standard of it has been so good. So my number 5 is The Handmaid's Tale. Number 4, another one I've talked about so much on this channel, and again it's ingrained in popular culture now, to the point where you get in secret cinema sort of specialist sort of screenings and all this sort of thing, merchandise, the various things. It's, I guess, for fans of prestige and for 80s style cinema and culture, it's their love letter. It is Stranger Things, this brilliant teenage coming-of-age show, which did a great job of pastiching those things, those tropes, having a lot of fun. You've got a really great 1980s soundtrack running throughout the show, but also doing its own thing, also growing the characters, having its own sort of style, having its own feel. But it is a lot of what you love about the 80s when you see teen films from that era, because you do get the progressive teens, you do get them as kind of the smart characters in the show. And let's face it, teens and younger people tend to get a bad rap in a lot of like films and TV, so it's always good to see progressive, complex teens. And this is a show, although it's a genre show and the sci-fi horror moments work really well, it's also that extra bit special because of how good the teens are, their growth, the performances, how natural the group is and the way they interact. It feels like they are real friends. And it does grow them. They do feel like they are going through these changes. Season 3 was really big on that. But politically, it moves with the times. I mean, the whole thing about the Mall of America being introduced in Season 3 was a really interesting thing to do. And the experience of going to a mall for the first time, having these endless amounts of shops and possibilities, but also unpacking some of the negative sides on local business and the community. And it does really, the characters do grow up in front of you. It's a very organic thing. Season 3 was a very nice sort of love letter to like John Carpenter monster sci-fi movies, very enjoyable monster moments. Again, just a somber cast, and I like the way in Season 3 you get the characters split into 3 groups and they slowly work their way to the same point. It's really, really great storytelling. and arguably might be the best season. And that's what I'm talking about with TV shows. And if you grow the characters organically, if you write them correctly, if you've got a game plan and an end point, then in theory it does sort of get better. Now recently I think it's been confirmed that season 4 or maybe 5 might be the end point, which is a decent amount, and they've always apparently had that in mind, so that's really smart. That really gives them a good idea of where they can go and their limitations. So Stranger Things season 2 the weakest, but even that was very enjoyable. Season 1 you had a really good mystery at the heart of it, and it did some really unique things. It really subverts your expectations as well. It's very good at setting up standard tropes and then subverting them. We saw that with the Steve character. But yeah, I'm a big fan. I'm on board. I think it justifies the hype. And I think if it can continue at this sort of rate of being so consistent, if it sort of sticks the landing and, you know, again continues the quality into season 4 and then maybe 5 if there is a season 5, I think we might be looking at one of the best shows ever in Stranger Things. But Stranger Things is my number 4 of the last decade. So into the top 3. My number 3 is Orphan Black, and this is a show which I'll probably do on the channel. This again is another very fascinating, unique sci-fi concept. You've got the director of Ginger Snaps, he's like the main showrunner. It's like this sort of low-key Canadian set sort of sci-fi. This sort of story of a doppelganger. So in the first episode, the character of Sarah discovers someone identical of her, and she sees her sort of killed in front of her. She then, curiosity, you know, draws her in, and she takes her identity to try and find out more, and then she starts finding out there's others that look like her, and you get all these sort of clones of her, and the plot spirals from there, goes into all these different sort of areas. And first thing say is to praise the actress, because Tatiana Maslany, I think that's how you say her name, gives one of the most incredible performances of the last decade. I mean, it's just so multi-layered. She just plays so many different sides of herself. You get 4 or 5 different personas which are different, and yet she's convincing in each one. It's such a skillful performance, and there's just so much richness to the characters. It's a really diverse show because you see all these different characters. It really deals in class and gender, sexuality. You get all these fascinating like subplots and characters. It's a very, very funny show at times. It is really entertaining, but also very gripping, very dark. Just a visionary show which really grows and grows organically. Some great character depth and growth. Wonderful performances. Yeah, just a very different style of show, and I think one of the most consistent I've seen in recent years. And this is another one. You've got 5 seasons, and I think over the 5 seasons, there's very rarely a weak side to it. There's very rarely a weak season. I mean, arguably season 1, it might take you a bit of getting into. It did a little bit with me, but certainly I could see the potential. But season 1's good, and then it seems to get higher and higher. So season 1 isn't a bad season by any means. It's a good season, but the show just goes to greater heights from there. It's one of my favourite shows, maybe of all time. I've only seen it all the way through once, so that's maybe. But number 3 is pretty impressive considering what a great decade we've had. So Orphan Black is my number 3. Number 2, it's another show which I think maybe falls under the radar a bit. It gets a lot of critical praise, but maybe is more of a niche show, falls under the wire a little bit. And that is The Americans, which is this really unique sort of take on the Cold War. sort of switches it up a bit, where you have these characters played by Kerry Russell and Matthew Rhys, this Welsh actor who does a perfect American accent. And they are originally from Russia. They're Russian spies, but they've been planted in the US, and they're essentially living kind of this version of the American dream, where they're in the suburbs. They've now got 2 kids, and at the start of the show, the 2 kids don't know their secret. And we see them going out on missions. They've got this cover sort of story where they work at a travel agent, which is just so perfect. And that's kind of the setup. But one of the twists is that they live sort of, their neighbour is an FBI agent, Stan Beeman, who they do this clever thing where in the very first episode of the show, he is suspicious of them. He's a bit, his instincts as an FBI agent are kicking in, and so he actually explores it and tries to find out if they are in fact Russian spies. And you get this thing where, like, Philip, the husband, throws him off the scent, and then from then on until, I won't give away spoilers, but much later he just assumes no, they're just neighbours, sort of thing. So I actually like they like approached that subject in the first episode to sort of deal with it then. So you get the 2 different perspectives of the American side of things in the FBI, and then obviously these 2 spies, as well as the embassy in America. So you get a lot of really in-depth storylines, a lot of intriguing character beats. You get this tension between the 2 lead characters, where the Philip character really from the very start is more caught up in the American way of life, because you have to remember this is set during the Cold War. This is set when the communist regime is still very much in full force in Russia. So the character of Elizabeth, Kerry Russell, is from that tradition, from that background, and she sees it very much as they're there on a mission. And she has no thoughts of really changing sort of sides. She's of settling down and becoming an American, if you like. Her ambition is just to carry out the case and to try and help Russia in the Cold War. But Philip from the very start has, different thoughts. He's quite enjoying his lifestyle as an American, and he does consider leaving, the service of Russia and going that way. So that's a fascinating relationship back and forth, great amazing performances. It's a really complex character from Kerry Russell. She's a great actress, very underrated, and I think one of the things I really like about her character is the way they flip around the gender roles, where the Kerry Russell character, she's actually the more masculine, the more traditional type character who's very much caught up in the whole service to the country. She's much more machine-like. And it's the Philip character who's a bit more looser, maybe a bit more open-minded to, maybe this isn't a great thing, but he's considering the possibilities, the future. So it's almost flipped that around. I think in a lot of things like this, it would be the man who's the more colder, cut-off type, tunnel vision type character. So that's a fascinating switch, and they do a lot of great things with that. A lot of compelling, meaty plots come up, and you see what a tough, brutal character the Kerry Russell Elizabeth character is, and you get her assuming different identities as you do with Philip. So you get all these different cases, all these different subplots. So Philip has a long running relationship with a woman who she works in the FBI office, so he's using her for information. But we just see how murky and complex things are, and how the characters have to make tough moral decisions. So it really explores these things in great depth. It's a really powerful, stunning show. It's, as a thriller, it's perfectly paced and gripping. And it does bring up these, as I said, these really murky, complex issues. Very, very stylish, great use of music. And I think, again, if you think about something like a Sopranos, and one of the things that made that such a great show, I think it's similar here, where it is that family unit, the family dynamic, where they do have this family life and they've got their children who, as I said at the start of the show, doesn't know anything about this, and that becomes such a great part of the drama as things move on. And the Paige character in particular, who's the daughter and the older one, her changes over the seasons, again, really good actor. They've cast it to perfection. And they just go into all these different areas. But I think, as I was saying, it is the family dynamic which really gives it that extra layer. The fact that it's how this impacts on them at home, where they have to broach certain things. Are they going to tell their children? At one point there's a suggestion, then this is sort of spoilers, but then Paige might go into that way of life as well. She might become a spy. And how do they feel about that? You get conflicts over that. It just really grows things so well. It's a great show from start to finish. Compelling drama throughout. It does this in a very different way. You get some really interesting sort of comments on the time and the politics. And again, light and dark. I think what's brilliant is it never really picks a side in the Cold War, in the America-Russia thing. I think it shows them both sides have blood on their hands, both are at fault. And it kind of engages you with both sides. You know, Stan is a complex character who, over time, I think becomes more sympathetic. He's maybe not so sympathetic at the start, but he changes over time. And the same with the Russian side of there's likable and unlikable. It maybe shows you what a flawed thing the Cold War was, and that maybe overall it's not a positive thing. But it doesn't just do it in broad strokes. It shows them there's good and positives on both sides, and just how difficult and complex human lives are and how they're affected by the whole thing. Fascinating drama. I think episode to episode, season to season, one of the most consistent dramas I've seen, and it really goes to some dark places, which is to its credit. But absolutely love The Americans. I finished it for the first time recently and definitely will be doing future rewatches. And that's one I'll probably review on the channel. So that's The American, my number 2. So before I reveal my number 1, I'll just do the countdown in reverse, 20 to 2. Number 20 was Community. Number 19, Jessica Jones. Number 18 was Luther. Number 17, Unbelievable. Number 16, staying with Netflix's Glow. Number 15 was Big Little Lies. Number 14, Person of Interest. Number 13 was The Deuce, on its third and final season now, in the UK anyway. Number 12 was Fargo, season 4 on its way this year. Number 11 was The Good Wife. Number 10 was Killing Eve. Number 9, Line of Duty. Number 8 was The Haunting of Hill House. Number 7, Parks and Recreation. Number 6, Sharp Objects, Amy Adams starring. Number 5, The Handmaid's Tale. Number 4, Stranger Things. Number 3, Orphan Black. And number 2 was The Americans. And my number 1 television show of the last 10 years. And when you talk about event TV, I don't think there's been such a cultural event on TV than Twin Peaks: The Return. Back after 20 plus years, bringing the story full circle, revisiting the end of season 2, bridging the gap between the end of that and the movie Fire Walk with Me. When it was announced, like I think 2 or 3 years earlier, I just remember the buzz I got then because it was so unexpected, and the excitement, and they were bringing most of the cast back anyway, most of the original characters, but adding all these new characters, all these new cast. I mean, the fact that we got to see Diane in person and Laura Dern. Hearing Laura Dern was playing Diane, and I thought that's perfect casting, and it proved just the case. Naomi Watts is in there, who's worked a lot with Lynch, and just the buzz, just the excitement. And then Twin Peaks, arguably one of the most groundbreaking shows ever, and the show which changed the game for television, was returning for one final. Well, we don't know if it's one final season, but it did feel like this mammoth, compelling event that brought it all back together. And it's auteur TV at its best. Of course, there was issues with the production. At one point, Lynch wasn't going to do it. He stepped away because of conflicts with showtimes. They wisely saw the light and brought him back. And boy, was it amazing. If you're a Lynch fan, if you're a hardcore Lynch fan, this is full-on Lynch. This is him putting his vision out there, taking his time with it. You've got this amazing cast, one of the most amazing casts ever assembled for anything. You had Tim Roth show up at one point, and he wasn't even on the original cast list. Jennifer Jason Leigh, Amanda Seyfried, who played the daughter of Shelly, great casting, really great role for her, a more meaty sort of role that kind of played with her image. You had most of the original. It's just one of the best casts ever, and it just feels like this mammoth reunion where they got them all back together. They worked around certain issues like the health issues with the actress playing the log lady. You felt it was in her dying days, but Lynch just felt it's fitting, and she's part of this whole thing, and they did a brilliant job of working her in and working around her condition. And there's just something about her final scenes that are just so poignant, because she's so close to the end, but it's just right. Then they give us something really meaty, significant to do. And it's a touching moment just seeing her final moments in Twin Peaks. Because she's such a big character, and they gave her a great send-off, and there's something poignant about that whole thing. But yeah, if you want the quirky Twin Peaks from before, if you're not so keen on this full-on sort of auteur, arty vision, and then maybe this isn't the show for you. It does a great job of reintroducing the characters and showing where they are now, but it really goes off in all different directions. It's one of the most ambitious, visionary, just mad sort of productions you'll ever see. But there's vision there, the genius behind the plot, and this sort of one of the most well thought out plots ever on TV. The way it all slowly comes together, these two sides, the dark half of Cooper, the lighter half. Just really, really fascinating. This battle of force and evil, which is ultimately what this season is, and the way they bring it back together, but very, very slowly. Lynch plays with you. There's lots of great meta stuff, like the stuff with James. James is cool, wasn't he? Playing with the fans. You've got really great music. I love the scenes in the Roadhouse. Just some really, really great performances. Kyle MacLachlan is terrifying. Oh, alright, just give me a minute. I'll be done in a minute. Okay. Kyle MacLachlan is absolutely terrifying as the dark half of Cooper. So the cast is just amazing. It's one of the best casts you've ever seen, and it's one of the television events of my life, really. I mean, just watching it week to week. And episode 8, which I'll talk more about another time, Gola Light, is just incredible. It's It's the fact then it starts off as a regular episode of Twin Peaks, and then midway through it goes into this whole crazy other area, which is a turning point for the season, because it becomes this thing where from there it gives the season, like, it's building towards the end point. It sets up a whole bunch of things, and it's just the vision from Lynch, the fact that he had many of these ideas, like the UFO ideas, 20 odd years ago, and he brings them back for this. And just how ambitious he is with the stuff he does, some of the stuff he reimagines and changes for this particular story. It's absolutely, some scenes are absolutely terrifying and shocking and surreal. You've got that full on Lynch sort of vision. And you do get funny moments. There are still those quirky, funny moments, and just the mad sort of off-kilter Twin Peaks stuff, which you know and love. But it's just a great TV event, which didn't disappoint for me. I think the fact that it divided people, the fact that there were people who loved the show and weren't so keen on the return, I think maybe shows me how great it was. Just the fact that a lot of the great things are divisive, they're visionary, and they're Lynch saying, that was the past, this is now, I'm doing something very, very different. I mean, obviously there's speculation on if there will be another season. Showtime have left it open. They said if Lynch has an idea, we're happy to do it. There's been rumours floating around maybe for this year, maybe talk of there might be a film rather than a whole series again. There's certain complications. I mean, it felt like such a one-off, get the gang back together type event TV. Obviously, we've had other cast members who have sort of passed on since then or during the filming. So it's difficult to see whether he could do it one more time. I mean, he would have to change it again. I think that's what's incredible about the final episode, that final two-parter, is it kind of rounds up and it ties everything together nicely in the first half. But then you get to the second half and you think, well, what's it going to do now? And it just takes you down a whole new road, and it sets things up for something a bit different again. And of course it wouldn't be Twin Peaks without a cliffhanger, the finale. So it doesn't tie. It ends in a very interesting place. It ends in one of those kind of, this could continue, there is more here, but if this is the end, it's a fitting ending. It could end here as well. So it's hard to tell, but it delivered for me. It is the TV event of the decade, and as a big David Lynch and Twin Peaks fan, I couldn't have asked for it any more. And in the future, I will be reviewing Twin Peaks on this channel. I will be doing all 3 seasons plus the movie on this channel in order. That'll come in the near future. But there you have it, my number 1 of the decade, Twin Peaks The Return. Let me know your top 10 TV shows of the decade in the comments below. I've been here long enough, I've been over 2 hours. But let me know what you thought. What are some of your highlights of the decade, some of your favourite shows? Thank you very much for watching. I've been bored now, and I'll have more soon. Thanks for watching, and goodbye.